Most people don't realise how much damage anger does until it's already over. One moment of anger can destroy a conversation, damage a relationship, or create consequences that last far longer than what caused it. And what makes it worse is this: in the moment, it feels completely justified. According to Seneca, that is why anger is not strength. He called it brief insanity, because when it takes over, you don't just act, you lose clear judgment. In this video, you'll see why anger doesn't solve problems, why it usually makes them worse, and how Stoics stayed in control without becoming passive or weak. By the end, you'll know how to deal with anger without losing your strength or self-control. This is based off some principles in the book A Guide to the Good Life by William B. Irvine. Link to the book is in the description. Why anger feels helpful but isn't. A lot of people think anger helps them. They think it gives them strength, pushes them into action, or helps them stand up for themselves. And in the moment, it really feels that way. You feel fired up, you feel ready, you feel like you're finally doing something. But Seneca completely rejects that idea. He calls anger brief insanity, and he says the damage done by anger is enormous. No plague has cost the human race more. Because of anger, he says, we see all around us people being killed, poisoned, and sued. We see cities and nations ruined. And it doesn't stop at society. Anger also destroys us individually. In the end, Seneca says, anger is a waste of precious time. Because we live in a world where there is always something to be angry about. Another headline, a rude comment, another delay, another bad driver, another small frustration. And unless we learn to control it, anger stops being something occasional. It becomes a way of life. And once that happens, you're no longer reacting to real problems. You're reacting to everything. And once you stop paying attention, you see it everywhere. People shouting at the TV like it changes the result. People arguing online over things they'll have forgotten tomorrow. People losing their temper in traffic as if it solves anything. But here's the thing. Anger changes nothing. It doesn't fix the traffic. It doesn't rewrite the comment. It doesn't undo what happened. It just keeps your mind and body in a constant state of stress. And maybe that's why so many people today live in a permanent state of fight or flight. Everything is urgent. Everything feels like something to react to. And living like that comes with a cost. Constant stress, poor sleep, inflammation, worse digestion, higher anxiety, less patience. People often argue that anger has its uses. They say it motivates us. Seneca rejects that too. He says it is true that people sometimes benefit from being angry, but it hardly follows from this that we should welcome anger into our lives. He says people also sometimes benefit from being in a shipwreck, yet who in their right mind would therefore take steps to increase their chances of being shipwrecked? What worries Seneca about employing anger as a motivational tool is this: once we turn it on, we will be unable to turn it off. And whatever good it gives us in the moment is usually outweighed by the harm it causes afterwards. And sometimes the consequences are much bigger than people realise. One angry shove can become a murder case. One punch can end a life. One sentence can destroy a relationship. One outburst can ruin your reputation, your job, your future, and the life you thought you were building. That is why Seneca did not see anger as strength. He saw it as a loss of judgment. Not because angry people are evil, but because anger takes away your judgment. You say things you would never say when you are calm. You do things you would never do when you are calm. And in a few seconds, you can create consequences that last far longer than what caused them. That is why anger is such a bad trade. And the strange thing is, the Stoics weren't telling people to become passive. They were saying something much harder. Act without losing yourself. You can act without being angry. A lot of people assume something dangerous. They think if you are not angry, you won't act. That anger is what gives you strength to respond. But the Stoics say the opposite is true, because anger doesn't make you stronger. It makes you less accurate. It clouds your judgment and pushes you into reactions you wouldn't choose when you're calm. Seneca was not saying you should do nothing when someone does something wrong. Even in extreme cases when serious harm is done, you should still protect yourself and respond if necessary. The difference is how you do it, not as revenge, but as caution. Not to get even, but to prevent harm from happening again. As Seneca puts it, correction can be done by admonition, and also by force, gently and also roughly, but never from anger, because anger distorts even justice. That shift changes everything, because revenge feels powerful in the moment, but it clouds judgment. Correction, done calmly, stays precise, firm, but not destructive. And this is what Stoicism looks like in real life, not theory, behaviour under pressure. In an argument, the angry person feels like winning, but the calm person usually controls where things actually go. At work, an angry email might feel satisfying for about 5 minutes. Then it creates tension, meetings, and regret. In parenting, shouting might feel like control, but calm correction usually works better in the long run. Even in something as simple as a text message, anger makes people say too much, too fast. A good example of this I read comes from Abraham Lincoln. After his assassination, when his office was being cleared out, they found something unusual in his desk. A drawer full of unsent letters. These weren't polite drafts. They were what historians called his hot letters. Whenever Lincoln was angry, often at his generals during the Civil War, he would write the harshest version of what he really felt. No filter, no restraint, but he would never send them. Instead, he would put them away, let time pass, and return to them later with a cooler mind. And often he would write across them, never sent, never signed. What felt necessary in the moment didn't survive his calmer judgment, and that is the point. Anger makes everything feel urgent and final. Calmness gives you your thinking back, and once your thinking is back, you don't need anger to act well. And that is the Stoic move. Not to suppress action, but to improve it. Not to become passive, but to become precise. Because once you stop letting anger lead, you don't become weaker. You become harder to manipulate, harder to provoke, and much harder to throw off balance. Most of the anger people struggle with is not even about major betrayals. It is about traffic, bad service, comments online, a rude text, tiny annoyances that feel bigger than they are in the moment. And that is where the Stoics thought we become fools. Not in the big, life-changing moments, but in the small ones we keep overvaluing. Because the real problem is not always the big explosion. Sometimes it is the small thing you keep feeding long after it is over. Why small things steal your peace. The strange thing is that most of it doesn't come from real damage. It comes from annoyances. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Someone says something rude. You spill coffee. You get a bad reply. Something small goes wrong. And in the moment, it feels bigger than it actually is. But Seneca would say this is the real trap, because the event itself is usually small, almost insignificant. What makes it destructive is what happens after. You replay it in your mind, you retell it to yourself, you keep feeding it until a small irritation turns into a full emotional state. And that's why Seneca says anger lasts longer than the event that caused it. Think about it. The moment happens once, but in your mind, it can happen again and again. So you're no longer reacting to what happened, you're reliving it. And this is where Seneca says people go wrong, because these are not real injuries. They are, as he puts it, mere annoyances. But when you react emotionally, you take something small and turn it into something heavy. A brief disruption becomes hours of agitation, and that's the real mistake. Because if something is small, anger isn't reducing it, it's amplifying it. The event passes quickly, but the mind refuses to let it stay in the past. And slowly, something uncomfortable becomes clear. You become your own source of suffering. Not the traffic, not the comment, not the mistake, but the fact you keep reliving it long after it's over. And once you see that clearly, the next Stoic move makes sense. Because Marcus Aurelius adds another way to cut anger off before it grows. The Stoic secret that makes anger shrink. The Stoics had one more way to break anger before it fully takes over, and it is something Marcus Aurelius kept coming back to: impermanence. Because when you zoom out far enough, most of the things that make you angry stop looking important at all. Marcus reminds us that people before us were doing the same kinds of things that we do now. They were marrying, raising children, farming, loving, envying, fighting, feasting. They were also getting offended, holding grudges, losing their temper. And yet, as he points out, of all that life, not a trace survives today. They are gone. Soon we are gone too, and so are today's arguments. That is the uncomfortable perspective Stoicism forces you to see. Not that nothing matters, but very little matters as much as it feels like it does in the moment. Marcus Aurelius puts it simply in Meditations. You do not have to turn this into something. That is the key. Most anger comes from exactly that, turning a small event into a big story. A rude comment becomes disrespect. A delay becomes an attack. A mistake becomes a personal offence. But from a wider view, these are still just small disruptions. That is why the Stoics recommended mental distance. Not denial, but proportion. Not ignoring things, but scaling them correctly. And this is what that looks like in practice. When something triggers you, don't immediately build a story around it. Ask a simpler question. Will this matter in a week, a year, 10 years? Because most of the time, the honest answer is no. And what you're reacting to is not the event itself, it is the meaning you've added to it. Seneca captures this when he says, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." That is exactly what anger does. It takes something small and inflates it with interpretation, assumptions, stories, intentions that may not even be there. And suddenly, a 5-second moment becomes a mental loop that lasts hours. That's why perspective matters so much. If you were to look at your life like a graph, most of these moments would barely be a ripple, a tiny spike, a brief disturbance, then gone. And if you were to fly up even higher and look down at your problem from above, your whole life, your whole generation, even the people around you, the thing that felt huge a minute ago starts to look very small. But when you are inside it, it feels enormous. And that gap between reality and perception is where anger lives. So the Stoic move is simple, not to suppress emotion, but to stop exaggerating the moment. Do not inflate what is small. Do not feed what is already over. Do not turn temporary friction into permanent tension. And that doesn't mean pretending nothing matters. It means learning what actually deserves your attention. Because when you stop enlarging small things, they stop controlling you. And anger loses its power not because life changes, but because your interpretation of life does. And that is the real Stoic skill. Not never feeling anger, but refusing to let it become bigger than the moment that caused it. So the Stoic answer to anger is surprisingly simple. Anger feels powerful in the moment, but it clouds your judgment. It pushes you into reactions that usually create more problems than they solve. And left unchecked, it turns small frustrations into unnecessary suffering. But the Stoics were never saying you should become passive. They were saying you can still protect yourself, correct people, and act strongly, without anger taking the lead. Because strength is not losing control. Strength is keeping it. And when you start seeing things from that perspective, a lot of the things that used to trigger you stop carrying the same weight. That is the shift. Not becoming emotionless, not letting people walk all over you, but no longer handing your decisions over to anger. So the next time you feel anger rising, remember the Stoic move. Pause, step back, see it clearly, then act with a clear mind. Because the goal was never to stop acting, it was to stop acting blindly. And that's probably what Seneca meant when he called anger brief insanity. Not because anger makes you evil, but because, in that moment, it takes away your clearest thinking. And once that's gone, everything else becomes easier to lose too. I hope this helped, and if it did, let me know in the comments what idea stood out to you the most, or how you would apply it in your own life. And if there is anything that still does not fully click, let me know below and I will do my best to explain it. If you learned something new, please like and subscribe to keep learning. If you know anyone who's interested in this kind of content, please share this to them as it really helps me out. If you want to watch any of my other videos in this series or the next video is out, then the playlist will be on screen now. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one. And remember, stay positive even when it seems everything is against you.